She's the one who actually built something with her life, my mother said, lifting her champagne glass toward my younger sister across the dining room. Not everyone chooses to waste their best years in a uniform. I was 38 years old, a captain in the Canadian Army with 2 tours behind me, one in Latvia, one in Mali, and I was sitting at my own parents' dinner table being told I had wasted my life. My husband Callum set his fork down very quietly. I put my hand on his knee under the table, not to comfort him, to stop myself from standing up. My sister Bridget had just announced her engagement to a man named Fletcher Odom. He was 51, ran a private equity firm out of Bay Street in Toronto, and had a condo in the Yorkville neighborhood that allegedly cost $4 million. My mother had met him exactly twice before deciding he was the greatest thing that had ever happened to our family. I tried to smile. I really did. "That's wonderful news," I said. "Congratulations, Bridget." She barely looked at me. Let me back up. I grew up in Barrie, Ontario, the older of 2 daughters. My father worked for the municipality, Parks and Recreation, nothing glamorous but steady. My mother had always wanted more than Barrie had to offer, and when she couldn't get it for herself, she put every ambition she had into Bridget. Bridget was prettier than me. That's not bitterness, that's just a fact I learned to live with early. She had my mother's coloring, that dark auburn hair and green eyes that photographed beautifully. I took after my dad, freckles, brown hair that never behaved, and a way of standing that my mother used to describe as too military, even before I actually joined the military. I enrolled at RMC Kingston when I was 18, Royal Military College. My father drove me there himself, shook my hand at the gate, and cried on the way home. My mother told me that years later, matter-of-factly, like it was a footnote. My mother did not come to my commissioning ceremony. She said she had a prior commitment. It was a baby shower for my cousin. I found that out through Facebook. Callum and I met during a training exercise near Petawawa. He was a master corporal then, and I outranked him, which he found funny, and I found a logistical complication. We figured it out. We married 8 years ago in a small ceremony at City Hall in Ottawa, followed by dinner at a Lebanese restaurant we loved, with 14 people we actually liked. My mother attended but spent most of the reception asking Callum's family whether he had considered any career opportunities in the private sector. We bought a house in Canada, nothing dramatic, 3 bedrooms, a backyard that floods every spring, a garage where Callum rebuilds motorcycle engines on weekends. It's ours. We worked for it the way you work for things, slowly, carefully, without anyone handing us anything. Bridget, meanwhile, had moved to Toronto right after university, bounced between marketing jobs, and by 31 had landed in the orbit of Fletcher Odom at a charity gala. 6 months later, she was living in Yorkville. My mother called me the week after Bridget moved in with Fletcher. She did not call to talk about Bridget. She called to ask whether Callum had ever thought about going back to school. The engagement dinner was in January. My mother had organized it at their house in Barrie. She'd redecorated since I'd been back last, new furniture, new light fixtures, the kind of updates that cost money she and my father didn't really have, and I didn't ask where it came from because I already knew it made me tired just thinking about it. Bridget showed up in a coat I recognized as Mackage, with a ring on her finger that I had no way of estimating without being rude. Fletcher was tan in the way that men are tan when they've been somewhere warm in January while everyone else was scraping ice. He shook my hand and called me the soldier's sister, and then turned back to my father to talk about the Toronto real estate market. Dinner was rack of lamb. My mother had cooked it herself, which she reserved for occasions she considered significant. She had not cooked rack of lamb when Callum and I got married. She had brought a fruit salad. Somewhere between the main course and dessert, after Fletcher had talked at length about his plans for the wedding, venue was already being discussed. Château Frontenac in Quebec City, nothing less than what Bridget deserves. My mother raised her glass and gave a small speech. She talked about Bridget's grace, her instincts, her ability to attract the right kind of people. Then she looked at me. "Not everyone knows how to navigate the world the way Bridget does," she said. Her tone was soft, even kind-sounding, which was somehow worse. Some of us choose a different path, simpler. And that's fine. There's honor in service, I suppose. She tilted her head slightly. But it doesn't exactly open doors, does it, sweetheart? Callum's jaw tightened. I could see it from the corner of my eye. "Some doors aren't worth walking through," I said. She smiled and sipped her champagne. On the drive back to Ottawa that night, Callum was quiet for a long time. Past Innisfil, past Bradford, somewhere around Newmarket, he said, "You know she does that on purpose." "I know," I said. "It's not going to stop." "I know that too." He reached over and held my hand on the gear shift, and we didn't say anything else until we were past the 401. The wedding was planned for late August, Château Frontenac, 240 guests. A Thursday to Sunday long weekend event because Fletcher had decided that a single-day wedding was insufficient for the occasion. There was a welcome dinner on Thursday, the ceremony and reception on Saturday, a farewell brunch on Sunday. It was, by any measure, an enormous undertaking, and my mother threw herself into it completely. She called me in March to tell me she had been given a role coordinating the family side of the guest list and floral arrangements. She used a tone I recognized, the tone she used when she was about to ask me for something she knew I wouldn't like. "I need you to understand," she said carefully, "that this wedding has a certain image. Fletcher's world is very particular. His colleagues, his investors, these are people with expectations." "Okay," I said. "And I think it would be better for everyone if Callum perhaps attended the welcome dinner but not the ceremony. Or perhaps just the brunch." I let the silence sit for a moment. "What did you just say to me?" "Don't make it dramatic. It's nothing personal against Callum. But Fletcher has a business partner who is also a military man, and the relationship ended very badly. There's some sensitivity there, and honestly, the optics of having..." I hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed in Kannada and stared at the wall for probably 3 minutes. Then I called my father. He picked up on the second ring, and I could tell from the background noise he was in the garage. He always went to the garage when things got difficult. "Dad," I said, "tell me honestly. Did you know about this?" A long pause. "Your mother has ideas," he said finally. "You know how she gets before big events. She asked to leave my husband out of our family's wedding." Another pause. "I'm sorry," he said. I'm sorry, Maeve." I held onto my own name for a second. The way he said it still sounded like the person he'd raised, not the inconvenience I'd apparently become. "It's okay, Dad." It wasn't, but it was the kind of not okay I had learned to carry. I went to the wedding alone. Callum suggested it before I could even bring it up. He was calm about it in the way he was calm about everything. A steadiness that took years of serving in hard places to develop. "Go," he said. "See your sister get married. You'll regret it if you don't." He paused. "I'll be here when you get back." So I booked a single room at a smaller hotel a few blocks from the chateau. I drove my own car to Quebec City. I packed a dress I had bought in 2019 that still fit and still looked respectable, and I reminded myself, the whole drive east on the 40, that this was Bridget's day and I was going to behave accordingly. The chateau was stunning. I'll give them that. August light on the St. Lawrence, the stone towers, the flags. I arrived for the welcome dinner Thursday evening and found my name card at the far end of the family table, next to an uncle on Fletcher's side, who turned out to be hard of hearing and deeply interested in telling me about his vacation to Portugal. Bridget swept into the room in a white rehearsal dinner dress and didn't find me until almost the second hour. She hugged me briefly, distracted, and said, "I'm so glad you could make it," in a way that suggested she'd momentarily forgotten I was her sister and was speaking to a moderately important acquaintance. My mother circulated the room like she'd lived her whole life for this. She was wearing a gown I'd never seen, navy blue silk, not the kind of thing you find at the Berry Mall, and she was touching people's arms and laughing with their head tilted back, performing at a frequency I hadn't seen from her before. When she reached me, she kissed my cheek and murmured, "You look nice, sweetheart. Is that the dress from your cousin Jen's thing a few years back?" "It's lovely to see you too," I said. She moved on. Saturday arrived clear and hot. The ceremony was in the chateau's ballroom. I sat in the second row on the family side beside my father, who was wearing a suit that was slightly too short in the sleeves and whose eyes were red by the time Bridget appeared at the end of the aisle. I held his hand. He squeezed mine. That was the realest moment of the entire weekend. Fletcher cried at the altar. I will say that for him. Whatever he was, he genuinely appeared to love my sister, or the idea of her at least. The two things can coexist. The reception went late. There was a band, a DJ after midnight, a dessert bar with things flown in from a pastry shop in Paris. I drank sparkling water after my first glass of wine, because I had learned long ago that events like this are better navigated sober. I danced once, with my father. I smiled at people I didn't know. I went back to my hotel at 11:30 and called Callum, who answered from the couch with the dog beside him and the hockey game on mute. "How was it?" he asked. "It was a wedding," I said. He laughed quietly. "That bad?" "The flowers were beautiful," I said. Dad cried. "Good. Anything else?" "I'm coming home tomorrow." "I know," he said. "I'll make dinner." I hung up and went to sleep. And that, I thought, was the end of it. It wasn't. 3 weeks after the wedding, my father called me. He called on a Tuesday morning, which was unusual. My father was a Sunday caller, reliably, after the 11 o'clock news. Tuesday meant something was wrong. "Maeve," he said, "I need you to look at something." He explained it slowly. The way he explained things when he was trying not to panic. It came out in pieces. Before the wedding, my mother had approached him about a contribution, her word, to offset the cost of the family's portion of the wedding expenses. Travel, accommodation, the outfits for the engagement photos she'd insisted on, a gift she'd had made by a jeweler in Toronto. The total, he said, had reached somewhere around $19,000. "We don't have $19,000, I said. "We had a line of credit," he said. "Dad, and she also..." He stopped. "She called your financial institution. She had your information from years ago, from when you were helping us with the house. There was a withdrawal. From your savings account. She had the old forms, and the branch manager apparently processed it without verifying. The number he told me was $11,000. I sat down. When? I said. May, he said, before she told me it was a loan, that you'd agreed. I never agreed to anything. I know, he said. I know that now. I'm sorry. I didn't know to question it. She handles the finances. I was quiet for a long time, long enough that he said my name twice. I need to think, I said. Maeve, she didn't mean, Dad. I said it carefully. I know you need to believe that. I'm not asking you to feel differently than you do, but she withdrew $11,000 from my account without asking me. Whatever her reasons were, that's not a misunderstanding. He didn't say anything. I'm going to call you later, I said. I love you. I'm going to call you later. I called a lawyer first. Not a big firm. A woman named Adeline who had an office on Bank Street in Ottawa and who I'd been referred to by a colleague. She listened to everything, asked clear questions, and then told me what my options were in plain language. Unauthorized withdrawal from a joint or accessible account, depending on how the branch had processed the paperwork, could constitute fraud. There were civil remedies. There were also potential criminal implications that could be referred if I chose to pursue it. She recommended I first speak to the branch directly. I went to the branch in person. The manager was apologetic in the way that people are when they know they've made an error and are already consulting with their legal team about it. My mother had come in with original account documents from a time when she'd been listed on an emergency contact form years ago for a completely different purpose and had made a representation to a junior staff member who didn't follow verification protocol. The bank acknowledged the error and began the process of reversing it. What took longer to process was everything else, because while I was untangling that, my father called again. Quieter this time. He'd been looking through their finances properly for the first time in a long time, and the picture wasn't good. The line of credit for the wedding expenses was sitting at close to its limit. There was also, he discovered, a second mortgage my mother had taken out 2 years earlier, for reasons that were still unclear to him, that had not been mentioned to him at any point. Their house was significantly leveraged. His pension, which he'd been counting on, was still intact, but the equity he'd assumed they had was largely gone. My mother had been managing this loan quietly for years. I drove to Barrie the following weekend, alone. I didn't tell my mother I was coming. I told my father, and he was waiting at the door when I arrived. We sat in the kitchen. My mother came downstairs in her dressing gown and stopped when she saw me. Maeve, she said. Her voice was steady. I'm not here to fight, I said. I'm here because Dad asked me to come. She sat down across from me. She poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot on the counter that was already cold and didn't go back to reheat it. That small detail, for some reason, stayed with me. You involved your father in a private matter, she said. You took $11,000 out of my account without asking me. It was an emergency. It was for the family. It was for a wedding I was barely invited to attend, where my husband wasn't allowed. She looked at the table, and now Dad is finding out the rest of it, I said. The second mortgage. The credit line. He didn't know. Your father doesn't involve himself in the finances. He never has. That's not consent, I said. That's just absence. A long silence. What do you want from me? She said finally, not combatively, almost tired. I want you to be honest with Dad, I said, fully. He deserves to understand what the situation actually is, and the money the bank is handling the reversal. I'm not pursuing anything beyond that. I paused. I chose not to. But I need you to understand that what you did, it wasn't a loan, it wasn't an emergency measure, it was something you did without asking, and it's not okay. She was quiet. I also need you to understand, I said, that I'm done arguing about my choices. My career, my husband, my house, my life. I'm done defending it to you. She looked up at me then. Something shifted in her face, not remorse exactly, but something older and more complicated than that, like someone who has been running a certain way for so long they've forgotten how to stand still. You've always been so sure of yourself, she said. No, I said. I've just been certain about what mattered. I drove back to Ottawa that evening. Callum had dinner ready, shepherd's pie, steam on the windows, the dog underfoot. I came through the door and just stood in the kitchen for a moment, looking at it. You okay? He said. I think so, I said. I think I actually am. The financial picture at my parents' house took months to stabilize. My father engaged a financial advisor through his credit union, a woman who came highly recommended and who had the particular skill of explaining complex problems without making people feel humiliated by them. The second mortgage was reviewed. A repayment plan was developed. It wasn't catastrophic, it turned out, but it required significant adjustments, including the sale of some items my mother had acquired over the years that held more market value than sentimental attachment. Fletcher and Bridget returned from their honeymoon in the Maldives and settled into Yorkville. For about 4 months, everything was very quiet on that front. My mother channeled her energy into the new dynamic, sending me occasional texts that were warm in a performative way, forwarded recipes, Articles about military benefits she'd apparently bookmarked. That kind of thing. I responded politely. I did not close the door. I just stopped standing at it, waiting for something to come through. Then, in December, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. A Montreal area code. The woman on the other end identified herself as an officer with the RCMP's Integrated Market Enforcement Team. She told me that she was calling in connection with an ongoing investigation and that my name had come up as a potential material witness, a witness, not a subject, in a matter involving financial misconduct. I asked her to be more specific. She said she wasn't able to be at this stage, but that the matter involved individuals connected to a private equity operation in Toronto. I said I understood. She asked if I would be willing to speak with members of her team in person. I said yes. I am not going to pretend I didn't know what that call was likely about. I had eyes. I had spent time around Fletcher Odom, watched how he moved through rooms, noticed the particular way he spoke about his investors. Vaguely, always vaguely, with the smooth confidence of someone who has learned that specificity is a liability. But I didn't have anything concrete. What I had was an instinct developed over many years of doing a job where reading a situation accurately was sometimes the difference between a manageable outcome and a very bad one. I met with the investigators in February in a federal building in Ottawa. Two of them. Professional, careful, thorough. They asked about the wedding, about the guest list, about specific individuals I might have observed in conversation with Fletcher. I answered what I could honestly answer and told them clearly what I didn't know. At the end of the meeting, the lead investigator, a man named Sorrell, with reading glasses he kept taking off and putting back on, said something that I've thought about since. "We appreciate your cooperation, Ms. Hartigan," he said. "I want to be clear that you're not implicated in any way. We're simply trying to develop a complete picture." "What kind of picture is it?" I asked. He considered this. "The kind," he said, "where things that looked solid turned out to have very little underneath them." The investigation became public in April. I found out through the news, like everyone else. A financial fraud case. The RCMP and the OSC jointly announcing charges against a private equity firm, Fletcher's firm, related to fraudulent investment activities and misrepresentation of assets to clients. The amounts involved were significant. The charges were significant. Fletcher's name was in the headline. I was in my car when I saw it, parked outside a grocery store in Canada, phone in my hand. I sat there for a few minutes. Then I went inside and bought the things I'd come for, and I drove home. Bridget called that night. She was crying. The kind of crying that sounds like a person coming apart at the seams, not performing grief, but actually experiencing it. Whatever had happened between us, whatever distances my mother had constructed or we had allowed to calcify, I listened. I listened for 40 minutes, until the crying slowed. "What am I going to do?" she said. "One thing at a time," I said. "You're going to figure out what you're working with, and you're going to take it one thing at a time." The lawyers. There are lawyers everywhere, Maeve. His lawyers, other lawyers, I don't know what's happening with the accounts. I don't know. Do you have someone you trust? A friend? Someone who's just for you, not connected to any of this? A pause. "Maybe Renata," she said. "An old university friend." "Call Renata," I said, "and then call your own lawyer." "Not Fletcher's lawyers." "Okay." Another silence. "I'm sorry," she said. "For the wedding. For the things that were said. For not, it's okay," I said. "It's not." "No," I agreed, "but it doesn't have to stay that way." My mother called 3 days later. She had heard from Bridget. She had also apparently spent 3 days in a state that my father described, when he called me first to warn me, as difficult to be around. "I didn't know," she said when I answered. Her voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it. "Maeve, I want you to know that I didn't know. About any of it. About what he was. I thought he was what he presented himself to be." "I believe you," I said. Your father has been so." She stopped. "He loves you," I said. "He's going to stay. I don't deserve that." I thought about several things I could say to that. I chose the honest one. "Right now that's probably true," I said. "But people can change what they deserve. It takes a while. It takes doing the things you haven't been doing." She was quiet. "I'm not cutting you out," I said. "I want to be clear about that. You're my mother and Dad is my father and Bridget is my sister and that doesn't stop. But I need you to be a different version of yourself than the one who called my marriage ordinary and took money from my account without asking." A long silence. "Okay," she said, barely audible. "Okay," I said. "It is July now. Callum is in the garage. I can hear the radio through the side door. Old Country, the station he's been listening to since before I met him. The dog is asleep under my chair. The backyard, which flooded again in April, has dried out and the hostas are enormous this year, the way they get every second summer when conditions are right. Last weekend, my parents drove down from Barrie. Not for a special occasion, just to visit. My father helped Callum with something on one of the motorcycles and came inside with grease on his hands, looking pleased with himself. My mother sat with me at the kitchen table for 2 hours. She asked questions about my postings, real questions, things she'd never asked before. I showed her photographs from Latvia. She looked at them carefully. She didn't say much, but she looked. Bridget is navigating the legal fallout. It's not simple and it won't be quick. But she has her own lawyer now, actually, a good one. Someone who specializes in exactly this situation. And she has Renata, and she has us. She called me last Tuesday just to talk. We talked for an hour about nothing in particular. About a show she'd been watching. About a hiking trail near her new apartment in Leslieville, where she'd moved after the Yorkville lease ended. I forgot you could just talk, she said at one point. I forgot you and I used to do it, I said. I don't know what happens next. I don't think that's a thing you're ever supposed to fully know. What I know is this. I have a house in Canada that floods every spring. I have a husband who rebuilds things in the garage and makes shepherd's pie when I've had a hard day. I have 14 years in uniform and 2 tours that changed the way I understand what matters and what doesn't. I know what I've built, and I know what it cost. And not $1 of that cost me my self-respect.